Imagine, you write your texts for years, reading them only to your family. And then you see your cousin publishing a book with your words under his own name. And instead of supporting you, the whole family says, you should be proud. My name is Claire, I am 28. I have 2 lives. One is on my resume, office, spreadsheets, greeting cards, coffee in a cup where my name is always misspelled. The second begins in the evening when I close the door and turn my phone screen down. This is my real world, old notebooks, a warm lamp, and texts that no one will see on my resume. Words have been my gift since childhood. My grandmother gave me a small notebook and said, write it down, or you'll forget. And if you write it down, it's yours. From that day on, I learned to see the little things that others overlook. My family also knew that I was the one who writes. At every holiday, I was asked to read a passage. I would stand up, hold the notebook to my chest, and read so that everyone would be quiet. Even my cousin Ethan, who was older and always confident, would listen intently and after dinner would say, that's worth publishing, Claire. I believed that this was what love looked like. Sharing my writing with everyone, like a pie. They listened, laughed, joked that one day our family photo would be on the cover. I trusted them. I even gave them drafts with my own corrections. Every evening I called my mother. I shared new lines with her, and if Ethan was nearby, she would call him over to listen. He always asked me to repeat it. And I repeated it. I liked being a home writer. I thought my family was a safe. Everything I revealed to them would stay inside. But one evening, as I was reading a short excerpt about a girl with a stranger's key in her pocket, I noticed his smile. The smile of a man who sees something more ahead than I can imagine. After dessert, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, there's a perfect twist in these lines. Hold on to it. At the time, it felt like support. That same evening, I came home, turned on the recorder, and started writing again. And at that very moment, a message came in on the family chat, a photo of our table and Aunt Liz's caption, the safe is overflowing, we need to find a bigger cabinet winking face. I smiled. I didn't know yet that a safe doesn't always mean protection. And that the strongest locks may not be on your belongings, but on your own voice. In our family, there was an unwritten rule, everyone brought to the table what they knew how to make. Some brought cake, some brought casserole. And I brought stories. And they were waiting for them. Holidays always had the same ritual. The old record player would crackle at the beginning of the song, my mother would put out a crystal vase with candy, and someone would inevitably ask, Claire, did you bring something? It sounded like a password. I would take out a notebook with a scratched cover, open a page with coffee stains, and start reading. At first quietly, then louder as the noise subsided. Even the children stopped running around, and the adults put down their phones. Ethan always sat by the window. He leaned back in his chair and pretended to analyze. And when I finished, he would calmly say, this is worth printing. His words hung in the air, and the whole family nodded as if they were stamping it with approval. There was one evening that I remember particularly well. I was reading about a girl who put other people's secrets in boxes and put them in a closet. Ethan laughed. The family is the closet. Everything we say stays here. Aunt Liz added. Yes. Everything we have is like a safe. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. And I believed, they are my safe. My words are safe here. Mom leaned over and whispered, imagine a book on the shelf, your name on the cover. I smiled and thought, maybe this is my path. But now I remember that evening and realize, Ethan wasn't looking at me, but at the pages. His fingers barely touched my notebook, as if he wanted to take it for himself. Perhaps that was when the safe began to crack. But I was too naive to hear the metal already creaking. The first time I felt it, it was almost imperceptible. As if someone had turned on a quiet alarm in the background. We were sitting in my grandmother's living room after dinner. Ethan was joking, telling a story about a man who lost his house key and now hides copies in every coat. Everyone laughed. But I froze. Because this image was already in my notebook. File keys _3, a few weeks ago. Down to the smallest detail. I wanted to say, that's mine. But I swallowed it. Maybe it was a coincidence? It happens. I smiled along with everyone else. The second time was at home. Mom was cooking spaghetti, Ethan was sitting next to her and confidently talking about his new idea. A heroine who keeps other people's stories in boxes. Each one is labeled with a date and arranged on a shelf like books. I almost dropped my fork. It was my scene. I had read it a few months ago, and the whole family had laughed that it was about us. That sounds interesting, I squeezed out. He winked and said, ideas are in the air, Claire. You just have to know how to catch them. I laughed. But inside, I felt as if someone had taken something out of my pocket and put it in their palm. And the third time, it was impossible to brush off. We were driving from the store. I was in the car with my mom, Ethan was behind us on his motorcycle. I shared a sketch with my mom. A girl is standing in line at the movie theater and thinks that each ticket is someone else's destiny. If she had chosen another one, she would have lived a different life. My mom smiled, very nice, daughter. We pulled into the yard, and then Ethan took off his helmet and, out of the blue, said, tickets are always about choice. Each ticket is a different path. I was stunned. He couldn't have overheard. But the words were too familiar. And that's when my safe started to feel unreliable. The metal seemed to creak, and the lock no longer clicked confidently. I still convinced myself that I was exaggerating. But when I flipped through my notebooks, I caught an alarming thought: what if I'm not the only one who sees these lines? The news came instantly, as if it had grown out of those little bells that I had been waving away from myself all the time. Mom posted a photo in the family chat, Ethan holding a book thick, with a shiny cover and his name in gold letters. The caption read, "The pride of the family." Comments poured in instantly, hearts from my aunts, emojis from my cousins, my grandmother's first like ever. I looked at the screen and felt something in my chest grow cold. That smile on his face, the same one I had seen at the table dozens of times, was now on the cover. That I can already see further became the cover. The next day, I went to the bookstore. I stood between the shelves, smelled the paint, and trembled. I opened a random page and found my line. She carried a stranger's key in her pocket and was afraid to find the door that it opened. My heart pounded as if someone had punched me in the ribs. It was my phrase, the night, the old lamp, the tape recorder, when I wrote it down in the dark. Now it was under someone else's name. I kept turning the pages. Tickets are like other people's destinies, boxes with other people's stories. My images, sometimes word for word, sometimes slightly rephrased, but recognizable to the last comma. Each fragment was like a needle. I sat down on the floor between the shelves and couldn't stand up. I wanted to close the book, hide it, run away. But I couldn't. I bought a copy and held it in my bag like a hot potato. I brought it home and laid it out next to my notebooks with blue pens, coffee stains opposite the glossy cover. Mine versus someone else's. There was one word in my head, betrayal. It was no longer a simple theft of lines, it was as if someone had torn pieces out of me and made themselves a new skin. Ethan wrote in the chat, "Thanks for the support. This is just the beginning," and family emojis filled the screen again. I was silent. The silence weighed more than any words. At the time, I didn't know that this silence would soon turn against me. I was silent for a long time. I told myself, maybe it will pass. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the book on the nightstand cast a shadow every time I walked past it. And I knew that if I didn't say anything now, I would swallow it forever. Sunday lunch at my mother's. The table, the smell of roast meat, laughter, small talk about TV series. And suddenly I took the book out of my bag and put it on the tablecloth. Can we talk about it? My voice trembled treacherously. Silence fell instantly. Ethan raised an eyebrow, picked up the book, weighing it heavily, as if it were a trophy. What exactly? His tone was cold and calm. I opened the page with the phrase about the key and slid it toward him. I wrote this. I have drafts, notes, dates. I read it to you a few months ago. A second of silence. Even the children fell quiet. I waited for at least a hint of understanding. But my mother was the first to speak. Claire, don't exaggerate. This is a family success. Aunt Liz snorted and said. He did what you couldn't do. Didn't you dream of having your stories read? Another aunt, Martha, smiled bitterly. If your writing was so valuable, why haven't you published anything yet? One of my uncles muttered. Everyone writes something in their notebooks. Who needs it? I felt hot. My ears were burning. Those are my words. He stole them. That's not success. That's theft. Ethan shrugged. Ideas fly around in the air. We all inspire each other. His gaze was indifferent, even condescending. As if I were a child who didn't understand anything. My father put down his fork. Honey, you're too sensitive. This is his chance. Don't ruin it over trifles. The word trifles hit me like a slap in the face. I stood up. These aren't trifles. This is me. This is my life. My mother reached out her hand. Claire, don't make a tragedy out of this. You sound jealous. Aunt Liz couldn't resist adding, almost with a laugh. See? I told you, she's always been too dreamy. A great writer, but she'll never get beyond her notebook. Everything swam before my eyes. They didn't hear me. They didn't even want to hear me. I pressed the book to my chest as if to save myself. And I realized, what hurts the most is not that Ethan stole my words. What hurts is that the whole family decided to call it success. I left the kitchen amid their laughter and the clatter of dishes. And for the first time, I thought, maybe my safe was never a safe? Maybe my words were never protected there? After that dinner, I tried to stay out of it. I hoped that maybe they would come to their senses. But the opposite happened. The phone rang every day. First, my mother. Honey, you're acting so strange. It's not the end of the world. Ethan is talented, you have to support him. I remained silent. She sighed and added. You don't want to look jealous. People are already talking. Then Aunt Liz wrote in the chat. Your resentment looks ugly. Family is about being proud of each other. If you can't be happy for him, it's better to keep quiet. Even my grandmother, who had always been on my side, whispered. Claire, it's better not to stick your neck out. Don't ruin the relationship. He's a boy, he needs to find his feet. And one of my cousins wrote directly in the chat. Claire, you look ridiculous. He already has books, you only have notebooks. It's a different level. I walked around the city and saw his book everywhere, in shop windows, in cafe windows, on a colleague's desk. People quoted images I had once written and praised the author's style. I looked at the cover and felt my whole body tighten under my skin. Once, in a bookstore, a woman approached the table with new releases, picked up a copy, and said to her friend. His style is so vivid, it's like reading someone else's memories. I bit my lip until it bled. I wanted to shout, because they are my memories. But the words stuck in my throat. And then Ethan posted a photo from the presentation, him in a suit, next to a banner with my quote. My relatives flooded the chat with emojis and hearts again. My mom wrote to me in a private message. Daughter, you're making yourself a victim. It's unpleasant to see. And she added. Think about it, if your texts were real, they would have been published under your name. I sat on my bed, looked out into the dark courtyard, and thought, maybe they're right? Maybe I'm just jealous? But in the drawer were my notebooks with dates and coffee stains. My handwriting. My life. I knew the truth. And yet I felt like a little kid in the corner, forced to smile. I wanted to believe that it would pass. But the real blow was yet to come. I began to think that maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe I was too sensitive. In the family chat, I was either ignored or bombarded with emojis, as if to say, you're overreacting. And sometimes I caught myself thinking, what if I made it all up? In the evenings, I sat in my room surrounded by piles of notebooks. I took them out one by one, as if I were preparing evidence for a film about the investigation. Drafts from different years, printouts, notebooks with scraps of paper, even old files on my laptop, _April. Docs, tickets _3, boxes _summer. I opened them and found dates, notes in the margins, little drawings I had made to keep myself awake while writing at night. Ethan's book was lying on the nightstand next to me. I put them side by side and ran my finger over them, my manuscripts and the printed lines. The date of my file and the date of his novel's release. It no longer seemed like a coincidence. It was as if someone had stolen the keys to the house and changed the lock. I turned on the voice recordings. In several of them, there was my voice, quiet, tired, reading an excerpt about a girl with boxes. On the recording, you can hear my mother laughing and saying, "That's just like you." I listened through my headphones and thought, no, I didn't make it up. It's real. But at the same time, their words echoed in my head, you're jealous, don't exaggerate, this is his chance. They overlapped with the recordings and eroded my confidence. I felt small, weak, almost guilty. I remember the night when I fell asleep right on the floor among my notebooks. I woke up at 3, the lamp was still on, my throat was dry. I opened my laptop and entered the password as if it were my last task. The folders with files glowed on the screen, tickets _3. Docs, drafts _summer, audio recordings. I selected everything, my fingers trembling over the keys. The cursor slowly highlighted the delete button. My heart was pounding in my throat. I imagined how the evidence would disappear, how much easier it would be if no one could prove anything anymore. My hand was already reaching forward. And at that moment, my coat caught on the edge of the nightstand, and the pen, the same cracked ballpoint pen, fell at my feet. I bent down, picked it up, and ran my finger along the body, my grandmother's engraving, a small unevenness where her name had been scratched by time. I remembered her voice, write it down, or you'll forget. And if you write it down, it's yours. My hand moved the cursor away from delete. Instead, I threw the files onto a flash drive, making copies, one, then another. My heart was still trembling, but now a crumb of determination had settled in my chest. I cried quietly so my neighbors wouldn't hear and clutched that pen in my hands. When I touched it, I felt at least a little connection to something real. It was a moment when I felt a little alive. That night, I promised myself that even if no one believed me, I would gather evidence. At least for myself. So that someday I could open these notebooks and say, here, this is the truth. This is me. But I didn't know yet that the next blow would be even more painful. I tried to recover. I went to work early, listened to podcasts on the subway, pretended to be immersed in spreadsheets. I told myself, don't touch this topic, or you'll go crazy. But everything fell apart in a minute. A photo appeared in the family chat, the cover of Ethan's new book. I thought maybe it was a review. And then I read the caption, Part 2 is ready. Presentation next month. And my gaze fell on the slogan under the title, Every ticket is a different life. It was my sketch. The same one I told my mom about on the way home from the store. I clearly remembered saying then, imagine if tickets were other people's destinies. Maybe it was a coincidence. But now the phrase is on the cover of his second book. My fingers trembled. Comments poured in, brilliant, I can't wait, he's already a cult author. My family flooded the chat with hearts again. My mom wrote, we are so proud of you, Ethan. I wrote one sentence, those are my words. The chat froze for a few seconds. Then Aunt Liz, Claire, stop it. You already made a scene. It's not nice to repeat yourself. Ethan posted a shrug emoji. The phone fell face down on the floor. My heart was beating so loudly that it was the only thing I could hear. I was flooded with heat, shame and anger at the same time. Shame, even though I wasn't the one who should be ashamed. I opened my laptop and found the file tickets _3. Docs. The creation date was 3 months ago. I looked at those lines and felt something crack inside me. This was no coincidence. These weren't just ideas in the air. This was a system. They listened to me. They passed it on to him. And he built his career on it. I sat on the floor among my notebooks and realized that I was probably alone against everyone. But the real confirmation of the betrayal was still ahead, and it was going to be worse than any guesses. That evening, I stayed at my mother's after dinner. Everyone had already left, even Ethan, who had gone to meet with his publisher. On the table were crumbs of pie, wine glasses, and plates in the sink. I washed the dishes, trying not to think about his new book. My mother's phone was lying on the windowsill. The screen flashed. I glanced at it out of the corner of my eye. The sender's name was Liz. Underneath it was a line that froze me in my tracks. Here's the excerpt she was reading yesterday. I think it will suit Ethan. I froze with the plate in my hands. My heart sank. The screen lit up again. From Aunt Liz. I rewrote it almost word for word to make it clearer. Please pass it on to him. From Aunt Martha. Yes, I'll send it too. She always reads us new things. Let him use it, since he's good at it. My hands shook so much that I almost dropped the plate. My head was buzzing. It wasn't just Ethan's game. It was a conspiracy. The whole family was involved. They listened to me at the table, and quietly rewrote excerpts, passed them on, edited them for him. I put down my plate, wiped my hands with a towel, and told my mother I was going to rest. She didn't even look back. I went into her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and clutched the blanket to keep my hands from shaking. One thought kept running through my head, they were never my safe. They were couriers. I remembered all their phrases, this is worth printing, be proud, this is our success. They already knew then that my words would end up under someone else's name. My stomach clenched with disgust. I wanted to go out into the living room and shout, I saw everything. But I remained silent. Because for the first time, I understood, I needed silence. Not to swallow the insult, but to prepare a counterattack. I left the room calmly and helped clear the last of the plates. I said goodbye and kissed my mother on the cheek. And already on the street, when the cold air hit my face, I allowed myself to tremble. I walked home and repeated one thing, now I have proof. They set themselves up. After that Sunday, I changed dramatically. I no longer brought my notebooks to family dinners. I didn't open my laptop in the living room or read excerpts after dessert. I responded evasively, nothing new or it's still a draft, it's not time yet. At first, they didn't pay any attention. But after a few weeks, there was a pause that was impossible to ignore. At Grandma's birthday party, the conversation died down, and Uncle Rob said, "Isn't Claire reading anything today?" All eyes were on me. My insides tightened. I forced a smile. "I'm just a guest today." The tension spread around the table. Someone sighed, someone turned away. My mother leaned over to me in the kitchen and whispered, "Why have you become so cold? This has always been our holiday." I shook my head. Inside, I wanted to say, "Because you made my holidays raw material for Ethan." But I kept quiet. During dinner, Aunt Liz couldn't hold back. She's probably offended that her book isn't on the shelf. Some laughed, some shrugged. I remained silent, clenching my fork so tightly that my fingers turned white. With each meeting, the distance grew. I stopped responding to their "we're proud of you" Ethan messages in the chat. I stopped posting my sketches. My evenings were now mine alone, a lamp, tea, a laptop, and no prying eyes. But silence also had a price. My mother called late in the evening. "Honey, I'm worried. You're not distancing yourself from us, are you?" Her voice sounded guilty, but between the words I heard something else. "Why don't we have access to your words anymore?" "I need some space," I replied. She paused and said something that pierced me to the core. "We just don't understand why you've stopped trusting us." I almost laughed into the phone. Trust? They turned it into a commodity and resold my stories under someone else's name. That evening, I closed my laptop and said to myself, now a different game begins. If they stole my voice, I would find a way to make them hear it directly. It was no longer despair. It was alienation, in which strength was growing. I knew that one day I would have to stop hiding. But to have the right to speak, I needed not insults but evidence. I spread all my notebooks on the floor and photographed every page with the dates. Coffee stains, torn corners, notes in the margins, all this only emphasized their authenticity. Then I got out my old laptop. It was barely breathing, but it contained dozens of files, tickets _3. Docs, boxes _summer, heroin _key. I took screenshots and copied them to a flash drive. It was my diary, which was turning into a dossier. I dug up old messages from the family chat. There were my audio recordings, the same excerpts I had once sent to cheer everyone up on a weekday. Now they had become evidence, my voice, my words, saved with the dates they were sent. I understood that I could shout as much as I wanted, but they would call me jealous. So I wrote to a friend from university, a journalist for a cultural publication. My fingers were shaking, but I pressed send. The letter was short, I need advice. There is a suspicion of plagiarism. I have evidence. What should I do? She replied the next day. This is serious. I can put you in touch with a copyright lawyer. And if you decide to go ahead, we'll do the story. But you have to make the decision yourself. I sat with the phone in my hands, my heart beating so loudly that I thought my neighbors could hear it. I knew that if I went down this path, there would be no turning back. My family would never forgive me. They would call me a traitor. But then I remembered their messages, where they had copied my texts for Ethan. And everything became clear, they were the ones who threw out the trash, not me. I called a lawyer that same evening. We agreed to meet. For the first time in a long time, I felt not powerlessness, but tension, like a charge. It was as if I were standing at the edge of the stage, preparing to step into the spotlight. And inside, one thought echoed, this time, I will speak out loud. And no one will silence me. The presentation of the second book was held at the City Cultural Center. A large hall, rows of plastic chairs, a banner covering the entire wall with the cover. And my line in gold letters, every ticket is another life. I stood at the entrance with a ticket in my hand. The folder with the evidence stuck to my palms from sweat. Inside were photographed notebooks, screenshots with dates, and a flash drive with voice recordings. People laughed, bought books, took photos. It hurt, but now that pain was fuel. When Ethan came on stage, the audience erupted in applause. He was wearing a suit, his hair neatly combed, a book in his hands. Thank you for being here, he said in a confident voice. This story is about choices, about the destinies we choose. I sat in the second row and clutched the edge of my folder. My heart was beating so loudly that it drowned out his words. He talked about his path, and every sentence cut me. Then it was time for questions. The microphone was passed around the room. I raised my hand. When I was given the floor, I stood up. My name is Claire, my voice trembled, but I didn't let it break. And before I ask my question, I want to show you something. I walked up to the stage. I placed the notebooks with coffee stains on the table. I opened the pages with my handwriting. Next to them was a printout from my laptop with the date the file was created. Then I opened his book to the same passage and showed it to the audience. These are my words. Written long before this book was published. And there are dozens of such coincidences. Files, notes, messages. And they all prove one thing: this story is not his. It's mine. The hall fell silent. Someone coughed nervously. Ethan smiled tensely. Is this some kind of joke? We're family. We inspire each other. I took a step forward. This isn't inspiration. This is theft. You're applauding a man who put his name on my words. The room buzzed. People whispered, took out their phones, and started recording. The spotlights hit my face, and for the first time, I felt no fear. On the contrary, I felt like I had finally emerged from the darkness. I put the flash drive on the table. Here are recordings of me reading the same excerpts. The dates are 6 months before publication. Anyone who wants to can check. The hall filled with noise. Some people were already searching on their phones. And I felt a strange lightness, as if the stone I had been carrying in my chest for months had finally fallen. I looked at Ethan. His smile had disappeared. His face had turned pale. His fingers were clenching the book as if he was afraid to let it go. And then I realized, for the first time in all these years, he didn't look confident. He looked like he'd been caught with his pants down. After I put my notebooks and flash drive on the table, the room buzzed. People whispered, took out their phones, and recorded videos. Ethan turned pale but tried to hold his ground. He raised his hand as if he could stop the noise. This is a misunderstanding, his voice trembled. She's my cousin. She's exaggerating. In our family, we always share ideas. It's not theft, it's exchange. The room whispered. Mom stood up in the third row. Her gaze fixed on me. Claire, honey, she said loudly, almost pleadingly. Don't air our business in public. It's embarrassing. But people were no longer silent. Someone shouted. If it's an exchange, then why does she have drafts with dates earlier than the book? Others chimed in. Show us the flash drive. Let the journalists check it. Aunt Liz stood up abruptly. She's just jealous. We've listened to her for years, and she hasn't published a single book. But Ethan did it. Her words were drowned out by the buzz. People saw that the ink lines matched the pages of the book. A student next to me leaned over and whispered. It's exactly the same. I've read the novel. I stood straight, even though I was trembling inside. For the first time, I didn't hide. Ethan put the book on the table as if it had burned his hands. Okay, he exhaled. Maybe I was really inspired by her words. But this is family. This is shared. I smiled for the first time in a long time. Family doesn't mean you can steal someone's voice. Family is supposed to protect. Not erase a name from a cover. Someone in the room clapped. Then another. And in a moment, the applause rolled in waves, from timid to loud and confident. Mom looked confused. Aunt Liz looked away. And Ethan sat hunched over, as if he were nailed to his chair. His confidence crumbled like a house of cards. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Because this time, the evidence spoke for me. After that evening, everything changed. Not immediately, the first few days were like a storm. Calls from relatives, messages with insults and pleas, even angry posts on social media calling me a traitor. But inside me, there was already silence. And that silence proved stronger than any of their cries. The journalist I had written to earlier contacted me. She asked for permission to use my drafts and audio recordings in her article. I agreed. A few days later, the article was published. And suddenly, my social media feed began to change. Strangers wrote, "Hang in there, your voice is important. We are with you. Don't let them steal anymore. I write myself, I can imagine how painful it is. But you are strong." These words came from complete strangers. They didn't know me personally, but they understood my pain better than my own family. And then, for the first time, I felt that my voice had broken through. Invitations began to arrive. Comment, read something of your own. I hesitated for a long time, but finally agreed to a small literary evening in a coffee shop. Musicians and poets usually gathered there. A small stage, a few dozen chairs, lamps with warm yellow light. When my time came, I stepped forward with the same notebook I had been carrying for years. My hands were shaking, my heart was beating fast. I looked at the audience, young people with cups of coffee, a couple of elderly people, a few journalists with notebooks. Everyone was waiting. I opened the notebook and began to read. The same passage about the girl with the stranger's key. The one I once read in the kitchen to my family, and they gave it to someone else. At first, my voice was quiet. But with each sentence, it grew stronger. I heard my words finally sounding on my behalf. There was a deep silence in the room. People were listening. Really listening. I finished, and for a few seconds nothing happened. I had time to take a breath and think, maybe it didn't resonate. And then the applause erupted. Real, loud, warm. People got up from their seats, clapped, someone shouted bravo. I stood under the lights and for the first time felt no shame, no doubt, no fear. Only freedom. My words were finally heard, without filters, without someone else's name on the cover. I smiled and said, "This is just the beginning. I have more. And this time, I won't hide them in a safe." The hall erupted with even louder applause. I had dreamed about this for a long time, even when I didn't admit it to myself. My own space. Not a corner in my mother's living room, not a noisy coffee shop, but my own room, where every inch belongs only to me. I found a small studio in the center. High windows, cracked wooden floors, white walls that still smelled of paint. I brought an old lamp with warm light there and put a stack of notebooks on the table. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid that someone would open them without permission. I hung my texts in frames on the wall. Ink on yellowed paper, blue corrections in pen, even sheets with coffee stains. I looked at them and felt, this is my body, my voice, my life. And now no one will erase my name. Sometimes I remember their words, "Don't exaggerate, you should be proud, he did what you couldn't." Once they sounded like a sentence. Now they sound like a distant noise that no longer has power over me. I think about Ethan. His books are still in the windows, but with a different tone. People are starting to ask questions, to doubt, to remember my drafts published in the article. His face is no longer triumphant, it resembles a man caught red-handed. And I'm not running away anymore. I write. Every day. And every time I open a new file or notebook, I feel not fear, but a slight excitement, like before going on stage. One evening, I was sitting in my studio with a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and wrote a new story. The first sentence was simple. They stole my words. But finally, I said my own. I read it aloud and felt the last stone fall from my chest. It was my cleansing. I got up and walked to the window. The evening city was living its own life, the lights of cars, the shadows of passers-by, distant conversations. And for the first time, I looked at this world without fear. The world belonged to me. Because my voice was no longer caged. I no longer asked for permission to be heard. I was already an author. And this time, with my own name.